Hi, I want to do a book review for Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. I can't believe what a roller coaster this book put me through. It definitely did not end up the way I thought it would, and let me just tell you about it briefly and as best as I can without spoilers. So, a lot of this book starts off like a young adult fantasy tropes galore. You know, it has kind of the chosen one arc. He's on the run, his life is in danger, his mom ends up dying. Typically in young adult fantasy, someone's parent is dead and they're given this great destiny, and it's only them that can save the entire world from doom and gloom. And Will's on the run, and he's been given this special medallion from his mother with an encryption on it, and essentially it ties to his entire destiny. He meets a whole band of characters, including Violet, who's one of the other main protagonists, and she's adorable. Loved her throughout the entirety of the novel, and she's one of the bright spots. And he's on the run, and he's slowly uncovering the world that we're brought into. The book sets place in London, and apparently there was an old world that was full of dark magic and a dark king that, of course, was causing nothing but mayhem and destruction. And then there's these shadow kings that are under his rule, and the reverence, and all these dark magical beings that will bring about a lot of torture to human folk. And a champion had come along, and with the power of a great sword was able to defeat said dark king and this dark kingdom, but it all fell. But there's artifacts from this old world. They're now in this new world in London, and it's up to Will and Violet and the other characters that we meet throughout this novel to obscure these artifacts and stop this dark king from rising once again from the ashes. And you're taking on this interesting journey where there's a lot of exposition and there's a lot of setup, which becomes relevant very, very late into the novel. One of the problems I can foresee people having with this particular book is that it kind of moves slow. There is a lot of terms that are being thrown at you. There's a corrupted sword, there's a reverence, there's the Dark King himself, then there's the four Shadow Kings, then there's the stewardess that are supposed to be the protagonist that Will is supposed to go to for protection to help him in his journey to stopping the rise of the Dark King. And there's a whole other bunch of mythical lore that you're you're being told, and it's kind of piecing everything together. And of course, because Will is the main character and you get a lot of his POV throughout the stories, even though it has multiple point of views of Violet, I believe I mentioned before, is another one of the main protagonists. She also gets some chapters in her head, but you're mainly going through the eyes of Will, and Will is as lost as you are as a reader, and you're just trying to piece everything together. And unfortunately, because of the exposition that you're given, and all of the groundwork that Pacat has laid down, you're kind of left frustrated. So initially I started the book and I liked how it was going, and yes, it had the familiar beats of young adult fantasy, but I'm thinking, you know what? Things will make sense. You hit about the 20 and 30% mark and the action really starts to pick up, and then it kind of gets bogged down again. You're explained a lot of stuff, and there are times that you will get impatient with it. But I implore you, if you have an interest in this book, stick it out, because the second half of the book really, really kicks up in a major way. In a major way, so much that it's literally the last remaining pages of the book where everything kind of comes together and you're like, oh my God. The second half really saved this book. And the only reason I continue to stick by it was because I've read past work from this author, and even though the subject matter may not be everyone's favorite, and I'm particularly talking about their Captive Prince trilogy. That is a very polarizing book series, and I can understand why with the subject matter and essentially the love story that's told within it will make a lot of people uncomfortable. And I knew that going in with this book, but I still decided to stick with it because I liked the author's writing style a lot and thought that their world building was really interesting, and they do a great job in writing tension between characters, especially adversaries. One of the strongest points of the book, in my opinion, is a relationship between Will and a character named James. James is presented to us as an antagonist, but his intentions are not always clear. He is very morally gray, and it becomes more and more evident of that the more you read the book, and their tension is written really well. This is a young adult book, so don't expect anything too out there like Pacat's earlier work, but definitely think that if the relationship was to progress into something a little bit more in the romance category, it would be an interesting play of wits. I really love the tension between them. Every time that you're kind of bogged down with some of the information you're trying to work through, there would be a scene or a few scenes that would pop up with these two characters, and the book would take off like that. So their interactions always made the book that much more interesting. And I just think James is basically CS's specialty. Characters that kind of flirt with danger and are constantly witty and keeping you on your toes and challenge the main protagonist, and you just kind of want to sit back and see how the relationship plays out. So one of the strongest suits of the book is the relationship between Will and James. Violet as well is a really cool character. She is a secondary character that becomes Will's friend, and they become each other's trusted confidants. And I just really like the way she was portrayed. Unfortunately, there are some moments of racism that are hurled at her, and there's just some uncomfortable terminology that is expressed at her. Like, she's referred to as an animal at one point, and it's just really racist undertones that are just really uncomfortable. And I can't help but find that to be a deterrent, even though there are some people of color that are in this particular novel. The fact that Violet is one of the main characters and she's South Asian, it's just not the most comfortable thing to read, of her experiencing racism and the kind of insults that are hurled at her. But it's not that the author has written it so that what's being said to her is justified. Like, obviously, narratively, it's not shown in a positive light, but still, it's just uncomfortable to read. So I just thought I would give that heads up as well. But I really loved Violet's arc in this book, and I just really enjoyed her interaction. If you have any interest in Dark Rise at all, I really implore you to stick it out. It reminds me a lot of The Ones We're Meant to Find, a book that I reviewed earlier on this year. Now, they're two entirely different stories, but they as in both authors in those two respective books, lay out a lot of terminology and a lot of groundwork, and you find yourself kind of muddled in it. And then when you come towards the remaining chapters, you realize why they spent so much time in building up details, and you get your wind knocked right out of you with the ending. Both with The Ones We're Meant to Find and Dark Rise, the endings completely land, and it just makes the whole entire journey with the books worth it. So I don't know what will happen with Dark Rise. I don't know if it's going to end up being like a TikTok favorite, for example, or if the blogging world will get behind it. I don't know if I've heard a lot of people talk about it as of yet, but it's still relatively new and hasn't been released that long. But the second half really clinches it, especially the last remaining chapters. There are maybe 3 books that I absolutely cannot wait to read. And one of them will be the sequel to this book and the sequel to Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. And I talked about Legendborn earlier on my channel, and I absolutely adored it. And it ended on one hell of an amazing cliffhanger. And the reveal for the second book cover just came out, which I'm getting off topic, but is amazing. But Dark Rise, believe me when I tell you the second half clinches it, and I am really, really curious on how Pacat is going to continue the story.